"She will do as she is told, your grace," said the woman selling her daughter, "and she will not trouble you. She has never troubled anyone in her life." The Duke of Garncliffe, whom 3 counties called the Beast of the Marches and half of London believed to have killed a man in a duel he had never fought, looked past the mother's bright avaricious smile to the girl standing behind her, and saw that she was shaking. Not weeping, not protesting, simply shaking, very slightly, the way a hare shakes in the instant before it decides which way to run, except that this girl had plainly decided long ago that there was nowhere to run, and so she only stood and shook and looked at the floor. Torrin, Duke of Garncliffe, was not accustomed to being looked away from. Men looked at his scarred hands and grew careful. Women looked at his wealth and grew warm. He was a large, dark, silent man who had learned in a hard life that silence frightened people less than his voice did, and so he used it. He had come to this shabby drawing-room in the country because his man of business had arranged the match, and because at 37, with no heir and a great cold house, he had grown tired of the arranging ants, and because Miss Linnet Fairborn's family was ruined and her mother was willing, and the whole grim transaction had seemed to him no worse than the way most people of his rank were married. He had not expected the girl to be afraid of everything. Not of him only, that he was used to, but of the footman who brought the tea. She flinched when the cup rattled. Of her own mother's raised voice, her shoulders drew in. Of the window when a bird struck it, she started so violently she nearly upset the table. She sat with her hands knotted in her lap and her eyes down, and she flinched at the whole world as though the whole world had spent a long time teaching her to. "How old is she?" the Duke asked. 20, your grace, a good age, healthy, biddable." "I asked her." The mother's smile faltered. The girl looked up one quick frightened glance, the first time he had seen her eyes, which were gray and very large, and said, in a voice hardly above a breath, 20, your grace." "Thank you," said the Duke. He signed the settlements. He did not know why in that moment, except that he had already looked into those gray eyes and understood that if he did not take her, this bright hard mother would sell her to a man who would use her worse. It was not a noble reason. He was not a noble man, whatever the epithets. But it was a reason, and he acted on it, and Miss Linnet Fairborn became his betrothed with a stroke of the pen while she sat shaking in her chair, having said one word to him in the whole of their acquaintance. They were married 3 weeks later. She wore a gown her mother chose. She said her vows so softly the parson had to ask twice. When the Duke took her hand to place the ring, he felt it trembling in his, cold as river water, and he did a thing he had not planned. He did not grip it. He held it as lightly as he could, barely closing his scarred fingers, and he kept his hand very still, the way one keeps still for a wild thing, and after a moment only, a moment, he felt the trembling ease by the smallest degree. It was the first thing he had ever done for her. He remembered it a long time. Garncliffe Castle rose out of the marsh mist gray and vast, and the new Duchess arrived at it in the dark, and the Duke watched her look up at the towers and go, if possible, whiter still. "It is a cold house," he said, as gently as his rough voice allowed. "It has always been a cold house. I mean to make it warmer. I do not know yet how. You will help me, perhaps, when you are ready. There is no hurry." She did not answer, but she looked at him, the second time she had met his eyes, as though he had said something in a language she had heard rumored but never expected to encounter. He set himself, from that first night, to do what he had done at the altar, to be still and to be slow and to give her nothing to run from. He learned her fears one by one, and he did not name them or laugh at them or try to argue her out of them. He simply arranged the world so that they need not be triggered. He told the servants, once and coldly, that any who slammed a door or raised a voice or moved suddenly near the Duchess would answer to him, and because they feared him, they obeyed, and Garncliffe became, by his decree, the quietest great house in England. He had her rooms hung with the warmest colors he could find, ambers and soft golds, because the gray had made her shrink. He learned that she feared the dark and had a lamp kept burning in her chamber all night without ever telling her he had ordered it, so that she need not ask and be ashamed of asking. He learned that she had been struck, not by whom at first she would not say, but he saw how she moved, how she guarded the side of her face, how she braced when a hand came near her cheek even in kindness. The knowledge sat in him like a swallowed coal. He was a man who had done rough things in a rough life, but he had never in it raised his hand to anything weaker than himself, and the thought that someone had done so to this girl, over years, patiently, until she flinched at footmen and birds and windows, he found he had to leave the room and stand a long while in the cold marsh air before he trusted himself. He came back in and sat across from her at the great dinner table, the length of it between them, and made himself speak lightly. "I frighten people," he said. "You will have heard they call me the beast of the marches. They say I killed a man." Her eyes flew to his wide. "I did not," he said. "The man lives in Italy and owes me money, but I let them say it because it is convenient to be feared. A feared man is left alone, and I have wished most of my life to be left alone." He turned his wine glass slowly by the stem. "I am telling you this so that you will know the thing they fear in me is a story I permit. It is not a warning. You need never be afraid of me, Linnet. I give you my word, and I have broken very few of those." She said nothing that night, but the next morning when he came down early to ride, he found her already in the breakfast room, and she had poured his coffee and set it at his place, and when he came in she did not flinch. She watched him warily, the way one watches to see whether a promise will hold. He sat. He drank the coffee. He said, "Thank you," and nothing more, and let her see that the small offering had been received exactly as offered, with no more made of it than she could bear. It became their way. He gave her stillness. She gave him, by degrees, small brave gifts. A book left open at a page she thought he might like. A word or two more at dinner than the day before. The information, once unasked, that she had liked to sketch as a girl before, and here she stopped, and he did not press, and she finished, lo, before it was thought a waste of paper. He had a room made up for her the next week on the south front where the light was best, and filled it with paper and chalks and every color of pigment his steward could procure, and said nothing about it at all, only left the key beside her plate. She went white, and then, for the first time in his sight, she cried. Not the frozen tears of the altar. Ordinary tears of a person overcome by an ordinary kindness she had stopped expecting. He sat very still and let her, and did not touch her, and when she had done she looked at him and said, "No one has ever given me a thing that was only for me." "Then it is high time," said the Duke, "that someone did." The marsh spring came, thin and bright. She began to walk the grounds, at first only where the walls hid her, then farther. He walked with her when she permitted it, always on her left because he had noticed she liked the wall on her right, always slow, always giving her the outside of the path where she could see far. He told her the names of the marsh birds. She began to sketch them. She began once or twice to laugh a startled sound, quickly stopped, as though laughter too had once been punished. And each time she stopped it he pretended not to have heard, so that she would not be ashamed, and each time the next laugh came a little more freely. He did not touch her. 3 months married, and he had not so much as kissed her hand except at the altar, and he had resolved he would not by a hair until she reached first. He wanted her. He was surprised, a hard, cold man, by how much. But he wanted far more to be the one safe thing in a life that had taught her nothing was safe, and he would sooner have cut off his scarred right hand than frighten her back into her stillness for the sake of his own wanting. The reckoning came in June. Her mother wrote, and then her mother came uninvited, sweeping into Garncliffe in a hired chaise, all bright avarice, to see how her investment prospered and to remind the Duke, delicately, of certain debts she had understood he might settle. Torrin was from home, riding the far marsh. He came back to find the servants gathered white-faced in the hall and his Duchess nowhere, and heard, before he saw anything, the mother's voice, raised, sharp, the exact register that made Linnet's shoulders draw incoming from the amber room. "Ungrateful, after all I did, after I made you a duchess, you sit there and defy me. You were always sullen. You always looked at me so, hold still. He came through the door. His mother-in-law had Linnet by the wrist. Her other hand was raised, and Linnet was not shaking. That was the thing the Duke saw in the half-second before he moved, and it undid something in him and remade it. Linnet was not shaking. She had put herself between her mother and the sketches on the table, her sketches, the ones that were only for her, and she was standing straight and her chin was up, and her gray eyes were blazing, and she was not afraid. "You will take your hand off my wife," said the Duke of Garncliffe. He did not raise his voice. He had never needed to. The beast of the marches filled the doorway, and the raised hand froze, and Mrs. Fairborn's bright face went the color of the marsh mist. "Your Grace, I was only. She is my daughter, I have every right." "You sold her," he said. "You have no rights left. You signed them away for money, which I paid, and gladly, because it took her out of your reach." He crossed the room. He did not touch the woman, he only stood, enormous and still and cold, until she released Linnet's wrist and stepped back. "You struck her. For years, I think. You made a frightened creature of a brave girl, and you called it obedience, and you were proud." His voice dropped, and it was terrible now, the voice he permitted the world to fear, and for once he did not restrain it. "You will leave my house within the hour. You will not write to her. You will not come again. The debts you hoped I would settle are cancelled. I have bought them, and I hold them, and if you trouble my wife by so much as a letter, I will call every one of them due and see you in the Marshalsea. Do you understand me, madam?" Mrs. Fairborn understood him. She left within the hour. She did not come again. When she was gone, the Duke turned and found Linnet watching him. He was suddenly afraid, he, who feared nothing, that in loosing the beast he had frightened her back into her silence, that she would see now only the man 3 counties dreaded. But she crossed the room to him, and she took his scarred right hand in both of hers. She reached for him, the first time after all the long, careful spring, and she pressed it to her cheek, the very cheek she had guarded from every hand her whole life, and held it there. "You did not raise your hand," she whispered. "You have never raised your hand. All this time I have been waiting for it, because everyone raises their hand in the end, and you never have, and just now you were so angry, and still you never." Her voice broke. "You are the only safe thing I have ever known." The Duke of Garncliffe, who did not weep and had not since boyhood, found his eyes were not dry. "I told you," he said roughly, "that you need never be afraid of me. I keep my word. I have broken very few." "I am not afraid of you," she said. "I have not been afraid of you for a long time. I only did not know how to say it." And she turned her face and pressed her lips to his scarred palm, and it was she who reached, always she who reached, and he stood very still and let her, as he had let her from the beginning, and only closed his hand at last with the greatest gentleness around her cheek. They were happy after that, in the way of two people who have each been given the one thing they had stopped hoping for. He never learned to be anything but rough and dark and silent to the world. He did not care to. But within the amber rooms of Garncliffe, he was something the world would never have believed, and she was the only one who saw it, and she guarded the sight of it as fiercely as she had once guarded her cheek. The flinching left her by slow degrees, the way frost leaves the marsh first the mornings, then the whole day, until one summer she realized a footman had dropped a tray behind her, and she had not started at all, and she laughed her low free laugh and told her husband, and he set down his coffee and looked at her a long moment. "You are not afraid of anything now," he said. "I am afraid of one thing," she said. "The same as you, that the other might have missed us, that you might not have signed the settlements, and I might not have poured your coffee, and we might each have gone on cold in a cold house forever." "We did not miss," said the Duke of Garncliffe, and reached for once he reached, and took her hand across the length of the long table that no longer felt so long at all. "That is the one thing neither of us need fear again.